Okay, let's start with the book itself. A philosopher looks at religious life. Why did you write this book? What led to its conception, and why did you want to share it with the world?
I'm afraid that's not the most exciting story. So, um, I'll start with what happened most sort of last, which was that an editor from Cambridge University contacted me because they have a series called "A Philosopher Looks at Some Topic." So there's a philosopher looks at sport, and a philosopher looks at work, a philosopher looks at human beings, a philosopher looks at digital technology. So she thought should do one on the religious life. Now, the more interesting part of the story is why she asked me to do that. And I said yes, because it seemed like a good idea. I liked the challenge of, I always enjoy the challenge of trying to reach across social boundaries. And, where I live in the US, there's religious people and there's non religious people, and they don't talk to each other. So I really wanted the opportunity to communicate across the boundary. But the reason why she asked me was that I wrote another book a few years ago and came out in 2020, and it was about the value of study and learning and leisure in a good life. So how these things are not for just elites; they're for everyone. But I started by telling how I had come to a kind of insight about that, and I had come to this insight, which was central not only to the book but also to the way I lived my life. I'd come to that by living for 3 years in a religious community in Eastern Ontario. So I'm Roman Catholic. So it was a Roman Catholic community, very monastic style, although not traditional in other ways. So it was mixed men and women and priests. Everyone was committed to celibacy, but that's a bit unusual for a Catholic community. And normally they're separated by gender. There are other things that were unusual or experimental about it, but anyway, this experience, which was 3 years of my life in my late 30s, it just changed everything about the way I live my life, and I wanted to share the insights that I'd gotten by doing that, but I also wanted to try to explain what that was like and what that meant, even to people that aren't religious.
Was there any specific impact you were hoping to have on a reader?
Um, I suppose, in the US, this is a superficial impact. It's not a deep impact. In the US, everyone looks to the East for spirituality. So it has a Christian tradition. So there are people that just go to church, but that's seen as being about right and wrong and morality. It's not seen about as spirituality, as a way of transforming the way that you live in a that goes all the way down, or a way of um, confronting the most profound facts about life. So spirituality in in the U.S. and I think also in Europe, we look to Buddhism, we look to Hinduism, we don't look to Christianity. And I wanted people to know, in the most simple level, I wanted people to know that there was a Christian spiritual tradition that was very rich, very deep, very old. I wanted non-religious people to know that, non-Christians. And then I also wanted Christians to understand that they had a spiritual tradition. So that there's a way of looking at Christianity where it's not, we have a very politicized religion in the US. And it's very much, if you're a Christian, you vote Republican, sort of sort of a thing. And or maybe you're a Christian and you decide, no, voting Republican is not the right thing. You should vote Democrat. But it's always about voting. It's never about the really deep things. So I wanted Christians to know that this tradition belonged to them. There was a way that spirituality was something it's at the core of Christianity, and it's a more profound and more transformative way of looking at religion than just through morality. It's not without morality, but it's deeper and it's different. So I wanted to communicate a bit of what what I think spirituality is in Christianity.
We are definitely having a revolution of sorts, especially with the recent events.
Yeah,
Um, Things that were never said before are now being said openly.
yeah,
So it's such a, I don't know if you feel this way or not, but there is this, I feel like there is this element of fear in the air all the time because of what's happening.
yeah,
It's so unpredictable, and
yes,
I think most people, we will never hurt somebody in the name of religion, but that's not true for everyone, which
right.
is which is strange to me because I think I noticed this even with your book. One of the reasons why I loved your book is because it intrigues. It will create intrigue without saying anything like this is how it should be done. And I
Yes,
love that. I loved
yes,
it.
yes. No, I it's part of the heritage of, um, I think, again, something about the US, we send abroad our, McDonald's and all this stuff, Taylor Swift, what have you. But one of the things that I think it's, liberalism with a small L, where what that means is you invite people, you persuade people, you don't tell them what to do, you don't interfere with um, their authority over their own lives. Everyone has authority over their own life, and so you invite, you encourage, you persuade, you talk, but you give people their space. And I that's something I've been really trying to think. I'm really grateful you said that, because that's something I've really tried to do as a writer, is not to invite my reader to follow their own reflections. And maybe they'll come to see things my way, and maybe they won't. But that's I would never have responded to a book that wasn't inviting like that, right? So if someone had written, I'm a convert myself, I come from a non-religious background. And if someone had told me, like, this is why you need to become Roman Catholic, ABC, I would have been, get away from me. Who are you to tell me what to do? I'm American.
Yeah. Yeah, I have these moments where if I'm planning to do something, but then somebody else comes across and tells me to do it, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. I feel like
Exactly.
the inner child is very much alive.
Exactly. No, it's truthfully the worst way to get someone to do something is to tell them to do it. And the best hope you have is to communicate what you are grateful for in your own life sincerely, and then maybe people will like it and maybe they won't. But it's the best you have is to just say, look, and I think that's something I don't hear enough of in the writing, the things I read. Just like, this is what I have that's good, and let me explain it. Let me talk to you about it. And then that's an invitation, but it doesn't. It's not an order. It's not a program. It's not a plan. It's just two people talking to one another about what they have that's good. Um,
Very true, very true. This is why it's so reassuring to have someone like you out there, someone who's so articulate, someone who's so brilliant talking on this subject, because we need people like you. Because again, want to know from you how you found religion to be an instrument of good and growth, because I think that is where the focus should be, and not on labels and specific rituals and specific practices. So would you care to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I think it meant for me in the most basic way, and I don't know if it's quite what came across in the book, but I think this is what's really most basically true for me. As a younger person, so I've always had a personality. I've always seemed like someone who was my own person, was unique and distinctive in certain ways. But the truth is that on the inside, I was always very fearful. Um, and and always looking for cues from other people as to what I should think, what I should feel, what I should like, what I should do, what I shouldn't do. And that went all the way down into my, what kind of restaurant I would eat at, what kind of clothes I would wear, what kind of jewelry I would wear, how I would think, how I would vote, what I thought was right and wrong. And um, it, And I know I didn't seem like that, but I was like that. And for me, having a faith, it gave me the strength, a kind of inner strength to step back from what other people thought, step back from um, what was going to be hard to say or hard to do or might look strange or what have you. And it's just made it much more easy to do it. The story of my faith life in the everyday is me doing things that felt terrifying because of how strange I knew they would look to other people. And the most dramatic example, of course, is I quit. I had this fancy career as an academic, which I walked away from to go live in this rural community in Canada that even Catholics hadn't really heard of. It wasn't like a very well-known place. It wasn't a prestige religious vocation, if there is such a thing. So, it was, that was the hardest thing I've ever done, to go to my teachers and my parents and my friends and say, I'm going to do this thing. And it's going to be very different. And it's not going to be anything that you understand, and it might hurt your feelings and you might think it's a terrible thing to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that that is just, I think, an extremely important thing for people to be able to do, whether as individuals or as families or as communities. You need some inner source of strength so that you have something that can't be taken away from you. I think that might be the core sort of psychological need for religion or for spirituality, is that you need something that can't be taken away from you. That no matter what people think of you, no matter what catastrophe, if you get very ill, if you suffer some major loss, if you lose your job, you lose your family, whatever happens to you, there's something that nothing can take away. I think that something like that is really, it's transformative. You're the same person that I have the same problems I've always had. I have the same mental illnesses and same quirks and same personality, same vices, same strengths I've always had, but I'm different because I have that core, inner core.
Yeah, I love that. I've been reading a lot. Like, this is something I also believe, that fear and faith cannot coexist, because anytime I would read my scriptures, this thought would get repeated. If you have faith in me, God would be saying, then there shouldn't be fear. Either I can be in you or there can be a lot of fear. So
Right.
I love that.
There's a beautiful, beautiful quote that I think about a lot. There's actually also a song, but it's from Judaism. It's from Rabbi Nachman of Breslau. And he says, the whole world is a very narrow bridge. And I think about these bridges in the Himalayas, like these little suspension bridges, but the only important thing is not to be afraid at all. So that image is, I just have that with me quite often. You're on a very narrow bridge. You can only go one step at a time. There's huge, terrifying prospects, and you're fine. Just don't be afraid.
Let me ask you this one thing. There are people who would say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious.
Yeah.
What do you think about that idea?
Well, I don't want to be very critical because I think it comes, at least in the American context, it comes from the 12-step programs, which are recovery programs for addicts and alcoholics. And it's a way, the truth is, honestly, those groups were founded, the principles are Roman Catholic, they're Christian principles, but they knew that not everyone would want to accept that. And when you're very broken from alcoholism or addiction, you don't want to be in a situation where you're being kept away from the help that you need. So they devised this program, and they call it a spiritual program, not a religious program. And what they meant was, you don't have to have a specific commitment. You have to figure out for yourself what you're committed to. But here's the basic structure of it, which is, I can tell you something about it because I've been in these programs a little bit. you surrender. You realize that you don't have control. Um, you admit, you face yourself, you face your faults, and then you turn towards others. And those are the basic elements of spiritual but not religious. So I say that. That said, um, I think for me, to me, being just spiritual sounds like, I think the danger of it is, I'd put it this way, the danger of it is it becomes about managing your feelings or your
Right.
psychological condition. It becomes psychological. And I think you can see that danger very strongly in a lot of this more self-help modes of religion, which is not religion is supposed to help you. There's nothing wrong with trying to be helped, but you don't want to just manage your mind the way that you manage your health or your skin or your figure or your hair. You know, you want to be connected to something outside of you. And religion for me is what does it. It connects me with something outside of me, that is to a personal, in my religion, a personal God. And that personal God has a history with humanity. It's a history with humanity of which I am a part. And that's very rich. It's a way of um, praying, a way of talking to God, a way of relating to others. It's a form of community. There's words, there's images, there's languages, there's rituals, and they're all aiming at union with with God. That is, with the being of being. With the most fundamental thing there is. And I think that brings in the whole person. You're not just a manager of your inner states, like, oh, I don't feel peaceful enough. It's not about feeling peaceful enough. It's about being in touch with God, the person who made the world and who sent his son to redeem us and established a church and ways of relating. So I don't know. So I'm a big fan of a full religion.
Yeah, me too.
With a past, with traditions, with a community. There's all kinds of things that really matter about that. But I also don't want to be too strict about it, because there are people who've really been helped by just being handled more gently, and so that's for them to work out. It's not for me to say.
Yeah. I think, like, I agree with you. I share in your viewpoint. I feel like it's like a safe, like, there's noise everywhere, and if you have a religion that you rely on, then you enter this building and everything's quiet, everything's okay. There are security guards everywhere. You can just leave your stuff and explore. That's the analogy I always use. And
no, it's true that things like having a church you can visit.
yeah.
Things like having a calendar, a liturgical year where there's feast days, that that's the time to celebrate. This is when we celebrate. This is when we fast. It's merciful to people like us, because we have too many choices. Most of us. I mean, most of us who are not in very bad circumstances. So it's merciful to have. This is what we've always done. Here's a space. Here are words. Here's you don't know how to get in touch with God. You don't have to figure it out for yourself. Just follow this way. This is what other people have done. They've been here before you.
I think I've heard a lot of people who are spiritual but not religious say that religion is restrictive. It restricts us. And I can understand why you would feel that way, because religions are usually ritualistic. So then you feel compelled to follow those rules. But I feel like, again, that's where fear comes in and not faith. It's not so much about faith, it's more about fear. So and this is something I really want to explore with you. I think there is, when you have been raised religious from an early age, which was not your experience, right? You were raised in a different kind of environment. I think then you have a different way of approaching religion. But when you are raised from childhood, as I was, you are fed these ideas that you may not necessarily agree with, but because they're fed into your brain at such an early age. Even though neither one of my parents are very dogmatic or very fanatical about any of it, but I still had some ideas that I cannot do this. Like Thursdays, I don't wash my hair, which just seemed like so weird. What's up with that? But I was allowed to question them. But
Yeah.
not in every environment are people encouraged to question things. And I think that's where fear comes in, and that's the sort of the suspicion people have around religion. How do you
Yeah.
feel about that? How do you feel about organizations, communities using religion actively to sort of establish control? I mean, I don't have any specific feelings about it, which is why I want to understand from you. And I think that would help a lot of listeners.
So it is trickier for me in a way because for me rebellion was becoming religious, eh? Uh, so in a way I got everything. Um, but I think I can say this that we live in a world where um, unfortunately everyone is always trying to control you in one way or other. So um, your parents do so, sometimes for your own good, and sometimes because they're human beings and they didn't know when to stop. But your employer does. These big companies that are always trying to sell us stuff. What do they want from us? Do they want our freedom? No. Like they want us to spend our money. They want us to be their slaves, in fact. So I think there's an illusion where it feels like if you escape one master and serve another, that you're really just living for yourself. So imagine I grew up in a very restrictive household and then I'm set out into free consumer land, where I can buy what I want, eat what I want, live like I want. It's going to feel liberating, but in fact, there's someone who's in control the whole time. It's again my boss, it's the people that are selling me things, it's my friends or my relationships or my spouse or the person I'm dating or whatever it is. There's always someone who you're serving. So the question is not, how do I be free from any constraint? Because no one can live like that. No one lives like that. There's no such thing. I mean, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, like the richest guys in the world, they're not free. They're enslaved by, you can see them function. They're enslaved by competition, by envy, by fear of losing their status, certain kinds of signs of that status, a sense of responsibility for, what am I supposed to do if I'm the richest man in the world? They're not free at all. So the question is, what kind of thing do you want to serve? And I think once you see, I don't know if I've ever seen that super clearly. It's kind of thing sometimes you only see in retrospect. But looking back, like it's you have to serve something, and the things that are right for you to serve, it feels genuinely restful, and like you are who you are. It might be hard sometimes. There might be things that you really, really don't want to do that are very painful, but you learn to trust it, and you know that your good is involved, right? This is what it means to me to worship a loving God. It means I can obey God because God knows what my good better than I do. If it were left up to me, I would be like, oh, which candy bar do I want? Which haircut do I want?
Right.
What coolest city in the world to live in? But God knows what I want better than I. So obedience is actually just a way to really get the most out of life. Because you're not always anxiously looking for the next thing and anxiously imagining that you have to make every decision. So I really think it's true. You're never out free from restraint. So what is it that you want to be restrained by? Choose your restraint. If you choose it, I think you'll choose something more like religion, honestly, than you will just being out there doing random things that don't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's a good, like, I would encourage people to think about that, journal about that, and I think that's a good starting point. But carrying this thought forward, how would you encourage people that they explore this idea further? Like, what do you want to be, like, what kind of restraints, like the soft, loving ones, the
Yeah.
hands of God, or do you want something else controlling you? Because something will, as you said, will always control you. And also, how would you want, like, I'm guessing my listeners, considering I've got listeners in US and India, everywhere, so they're people of all kinds of following, so all kinds of calling, I guess. So what method would you recommend they use to approach religion with? If they're intrigued by what you've proposed, how do they follow it further?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I think the first most important thing is to have some space in one's life for silence and for solitude, where there's empty space, so to speak. So give your phone to someone else to keep, like, leave it in the office or whatever, or some other place, or lock it in a drawer. Give yourself, like, even just an hour or half an hour or 20 minutes. And do that with some regularity. Just get to know that empty space, because things happen there that you're not letting happen anywhere else. And that's just a human thing. It's not that there's anything wrong with us for doing that. It's just the way we are. We fill up our spaces because there's something we don't want to be looking at. So have that habit, a habit of silence, solitude. You can go for a walk, you can sit in a room, whatever it is. Just no devices and maybe no other people, just you. That's one thing. I recommend, of course, reading. I'm a big book person, so read books that are old and full of wisdom. So there are a lot of books like this. There's scriptures in all the traditions, or there's also great works of literature, great works of philosophy, anything that's going to force you to open up a little bit to some bigger questions, some kind of reflection about, so that you're stopping. Again, it's like the silence and the solitude. You stop and you have some space to reflect on bigger questions about what life is about. So those are two things: solitude and silence, reading. But the third thing, in a way, is the simplest, and that is to look at what's around you, what's in your community. So, for instance, I became Roman Catholic. Why? Well, I had three kinds of religious friend. There were three people in the world that I operated, which was an academic community mostly. Some were Jewish, some were the type of Christian that's called Episcopalian. It's Anglican. I guess that's pretty obvious in India. But okay, so some were Anglican, some were Catholic. And I just worked my way down. I was like, first I'll try this, and then I'll try this, and then I'll try this, But if you don't know any religious people, if you don't have your own heritage, or if you don't have friends that are involved in one, then look in what's in your area. What temple is there? What mosque is there? What church is there? What do your coworkers do? Because there's so much all around you. The thing about religion that fascinates me still is that it was around me my whole life, and I never saw it.
Yeah.
So, around the street from where I grew up, this very, very secular, left-wing, progressive, like non-religious environment. Right around the corner, there's a huge Gothic church, and there's a convent of nuns, of the Missionaries of Charity, the Mother Teresa nuns. I used to see them walk around in habits when I was growing up. It never entered into my consciousness. There were religious people, there were shrines, there were people going to church, there were people praying, but I never saw it. So that's probably, no matter where you are, that's going on around you right now. And it will be helpful anyway for you to be connected to the place that you are, and for you to be connected to other people who are involved in the community, because you need community.
Yeah.
I think those are kind of the three things and just also to trust that you'll figure it out, and to be a little bit adventurous, push yourself a little bit, but you don't have to do something crazy, just push yourself a little bit. Talk to someone who's a little bit not the sort of person you would normally talk to.
Okay.
And then, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then I think you become more and more bold when you realize how interesting and how fun it is. I mean, it's an adventure. Life is a beautiful adventure. So it's not something to be afraid of.
Yes. I love that answer. And I have so many questions now. Okay. How much would you encourage people to question what they're learning? Say you feel called to a particular religion, be it Hinduism, Christianity, whatever. How much would you question what you're learning?
I'm a questioner by nature. I'm trained that way in philosophy. But I think the main thing is not questioning, it's honesty with oneself. So I don't think one of the things that's really key about a spiritual life, about a life with religion, is that lying to yourself never gets you anywhere. So don't pretend that you're okay with something that you're not okay with. That doesn't mean you have to shout and yell and, run out of the room. I mean, maybe you will, that's okay. But you have to say to yourself, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't understand that. And ask God to make it clear to you. Say, God, I don't understand this. Tell me what it is. And also, one of the signs of a healthy religious community is that they will accept your honest questions. So it's one of the dangers, and I want to be very frank about this because I think it's very serious. When you're seeking a religion or when you're new in a religion, you can be very vulnerable, very open, because you're opening up parts of yourself that have never been opened up. And unfortunately, the world is full of people who will take advantage of that in ways that are bad. So that's one of the reasons why honesty is so important, because you don't want to, in a way, we live at like two poles, two extremes. And one is where you just accept everything, like, okay, whatever you say, I'll do whatever you say. Absolutely. Complete obedience. Oh, I think there's something wrong with that, but let's not think about that. And then complete questioning, rebellion. And we don't know how to do the thing that's in between, which is you find people that you trust and you trust them slowly. You don't do everything at once. And then you do some things trustingly, and other things you say, I don't understand this. But you want to be around people who accept your honest reaction. If they don't accept your honest reaction, there's something wrong. Because those aren't people who accept you as a human being. They're people that want a particular reaction from you. Is that clear? So
yes,
you have to be honest with yourself, and you need to find people who will let you be honest with yourself, and who even encourage it. That doesn't mean that you always do exactly what you want, but it means that you are able to say, for instance, within a monastic community, one of the signs of a healthy monastic communities are all under obedience. So you're supposed to do what someone tells you to do. That's part of the spiritual principle. You have to do that. But the places where you're supposed to do what your superior says, and you're not even supposed to think about it, now that's not a good place. The place where your superior says, do this, dig that ditch, or whatever it is, and you say, I don't really understand why I'm supposed to do that. Shouldn't we be doing this other thing? And they say, okay, thanks for saying that. I think you should do it anyway. That's a healthy community.
Right.
So yeah, honesty And humanity and simplicity are the key, the signs of a good place, and of a place where you are comfortable with who you are, and with the direction which you're growing. It's very important because of how vulnerable and so how dangerous it can be to open yourself up to something new.
Thank you so much for that answer, because I think that is hugely, hugely a very, very helpful answer. I was going to ask you, like, if you can help people understand the kind of teachers they should follow, but that I think clarifies it a lot. Now, I want to ask you about you encourage people to question whatever they're learning, and I appreciate that as well. Now, surrender versus conviction. I feel like the more I've always been religious, but the more I practice it actively, like the chunks of my day are dedicated to it, I'm cultivating these deep, deep convictions. I don't feel the need to force them on anyone or even talk about them all that much. But I'm also, there is so much more surrender. But I've always found it hard to explain to people. It, can you help my listeners understand,
I love that.
like, the coexistence of these two elements, surrender and conviction?
I love the question. I think it works like this. I'm not sure. I think that the conviction and the surrender are helping one another. So when you first surrender, you don't really know that it's going to work. You don't really know that it's good for you.
Right.
You don't really know that peace is going to come from it. You're just trusting. Maybe what someone else told you, or maybe a particular procedure, way of life. So when you surrender that way, that's a kind of conviction because you trust whatever you're following enough to do that. But then when you see the fruits of that, then your conviction gets deeper because you realize that the thing that you were told from the beginning was true. You were following a good rule. And so then you're strong enough to just surrender some more because you've done it before.
Yes.
So I think that's the kind of that's what you'd always want if you in this kind of life, is to get more and more surrendered and more convinced. And that, when I say that, that makes you sound like you're becoming a zombie or something, but it isn't like that because you're still, sometimes it's happening just at a very, very deep level. Surrendering can just mean putting one foot in front of the other. It doesn't have to mean, oh, I'm so peaceful, like I show no signs of disturbance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the saints in the Roman Catholic Church who I think about a lot, very famous from the 19th century, Saint Therese of Lisieux, French, very young woman. She died at 23 from tuberculosis. In the last 2 years of her life, she had no experience of God. She felt like an atheist. And she endured it. So it wasn't like she was an atheist, because deep down in the core of who she knew that God was real. And she knew that this was something that she was enduring and had to surrender to see what was on the other side of it. So I think, or you think about surrendering in the face of grief. It doesn't mean you don't weep and wail and, do everything that a human being would do, but at the core of your being that you need to keep going one step at a time in this one direction. But down there, the conviction and the surrender are reinforcing each other. The more you surrender, the more you trust. The more you trust, the more you surrender. Just keeps going.
Yes, yes. That's such a lovely answer. So positive. I love that. Yeah, I think like when I read Bhagavad Gita, the whole principle of surrender was to stay balanced. Don't fly too high when you're happy and triumphant, and don't go into the pits of despair when things are not going your way. Stay balanced because I am controlling everything. This is where I think it gets very interesting, because religion doesn't leave much room for ego. I mean, in the friendliest of way, It's like,
Yeah.
I am in control. Calm down, relax, don't freak out so much. I got this.
Yeah.
But it's so hard. But I find it very interesting because the more, if I like yesterday, I spent all day in prayer. My internal world was very different. But when I'm working and praying, I feel like I go between worlds. I travel between worlds. I'm so disturbed sometimes, and I'm so calm the other times. Like this duality to it. I don't know if you've ever found that, because you actively spent this time in a community that was dedicated to these ideas. So then, please talk about like ego, religion, and do you have to be an ascetic to fully lean into that energy?
It's a hard question because um,
You've kind of answered it like with your previous question, because I think that
yeah,
really explains the surrender versus conviction. The way you've explained it, I think that's massively helpful. I'm just like wanting to take it a bit further.
I mean, the funny thing about me being this person who always talks about asceticism is that by nature I'm like a hedonist. Like I like food and you know, things that smell good and comfortable chairs, and I like to do what I want. Um, so I think um, part of what asceticism does is, um, to me, it feels actually a bit more like obedience or something, like or silence. It's just a kind of a freedom. You're just removing a distraction. You're clearing the air, and then that allows for other things to happen. I mean, one of the things for some, I don't know, this is maybe seem like a dumb example, but when I lived in the community, one practice we had was, we people donated their old things to us, and that's where your clothes came from. They came from donation. We didn't buy clothes. You would find something that someone had gotten rid of, and you could choose what you wanted, and find things that fit you better than others and wear certain colors. But you weren't going to buy anything. It was going to be something that someone else had worn. So sometimes that was you found good things, and sometimes you had to do without something for a long time. But in a way, that's also a kind of liberation because you just didn't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, also wouldn't leave much room for ego then.
Well,
You're wearing someone else's clothes. I think that in
maybe,
itself is a huge step.
yeah, maybe I need to hear more about what you think ego is. What do you think? What do you mean when you say ego?
So initially, like before I started reading the scriptures, I would always say religion was pride, arrogance of to a certain degree, having this belief that I am doing this. This is all me. Then I started reading the scriptures, and I realized you are not doing anything. You are simply the instrument, and also like ego is. I started to feel like then you sort of renounce that identity that is all you oriented, and you start feeling part of a larger whole. And also just how tiny you matter to God immensely, but you're also like this tiny being. So I'm still fleshing this out. I'm still fleshing
Yeah,
this
yeah,
idea
yeah.
out.
Yeah, so I think that kind of thing I notice more with that's more like obedience for me than that's the type of asceticism it is. Because part of what happens when you're under an obedience, and you can be under obedience, by the way, of course, at work, or it doesn't have to be a fancy community with its own arcane rules. I mean, even where I work now, the college I work, people have different jobs. Some people are in authority, and some people aren't. Now, if you're like me, you always think you know best. You have a big imagination. You see a big picture. And so you're always thinking about ways things could be better. And the person in charge, they're not doing their job as well as you could do it, you think. Now, that's where my ego is the worst. So it's in that kind of context where I'm like, I should be in control because you, the person, the human being in charge, you don't know what you're doing. And so for me, obedience is the hardest and the most important of the forms of asceticism, because I have to say, um, you know what? Uh, God has ordered things so that this other person's in charge and I'm not. And And I have to trust that that's the way things are supposed to be. And in fact, I probably don't see everything I think I see. And even if I do, that other person is learning something. Even when I'm absolutely right and they're absolutely wrong, something else needs to happen that isn't just me being right and things going well. So a lot of the hardest kind of asceticism for me is knowing that things maybe are supposed to go a bit badly, because what matters is not what I think things going well is. It doesn't matter what I think a good student or a good dean or a good college looks like. What matters is each of these human beings that's involved working out their own thing, their own journey. And that's deeply humiliating for me in a very, very healthy way.
Do you think
Very,
you're
very healthy.
like,
Yeah.
after having lived in the community, do you think you're better at it?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Because I was older than other people who were entering the community. I was already in my late 30s. Many of them were in their 20s or early 30s, so 10 to 15 years younger than me. And I was a person with experience, who was intelligent and who was older. And sometimes being told what to do is like being in an excellent school. It's like someone knows better than you and you're learning. And that's the best kind. I love that. I love that. I love to learn. But then sometimes someone would be in charge and I would be confident that what they were asking me to do was wrong or didn't make sense. And you just had to do it. And then you saw what the results were and something important happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So you learn that that's how things are supposed to work. So it's actually one of the main things I learned, I think, from that community, because I now see people who haven't had that kind of experience, and all they do is complain. Like complain, complain, complain. It's like there's no. This is how things are supposed to work.
Yeah, yeah.
Complaining is this sort of self-indulgent thing where you're imagining that if you were in charge, everything would be perfect.
Yeah, yeah. I there was Kurt Blackson. I don't know if you're familiar with the name. He was on the show, and he's someone who always says that I am at heart an Indian, something like that. I don't want to butcher what he said. He said something very beautiful about India, but what he found in India was duality, which I think is, you just see it more clearly in India, especially if you're traveling from US, the traffic, the population, the way there is like the rich living next to the poor. I think you see that very clearly here. But I think that's true for all places. You kind of see the duality, and we're so desirous of all good things. And yet when the bad comes around, suddenly there's this wall of resistance,
Yeah.
which I think, you should, I don't know. I mean, it is challenging to stay in that flow and not question and not complain. That is definitely very hard. And even with like I've met a lot of ascetics, especially on this, like the path that I'm now on. I'm exploring this more and more, and I've met ascetics who are like, you want to sit and just smile at them. Their energy is so wonderful, so wonderful. They're amazing, and yet you've met ascetics who have very firm ideas. You can't negotiate with them. They're gonna give you this, like, this is how, like, I met an ascetic and he's like, you should be using your podcast to propagate ideas of Sanatan Dharma, like Hinduism, and you should be teaching. And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And like, he's a wonderful guy, and he feels like religions are under attack and everyone should be protecting the wonderful parts of the religion, which is actually a great idea.
Yes.
But he doesn't quite understand he's been living in seclusion for so long. I'm like, come watch a news channel and maybe you'll change your mind. It's so interesting, and this is what I love. I feel like, keep questioning, and again, you can refuse to answer this, but based on what has happened in the recent few months, I see a lot of conviction in people, which to me has become, it looks dangerous. And now here's where, again, you can absolutely refuse to answer this. Do you think hate for any human can coexist with religious inclinations with love for God?
Well, I think I'll definitely answer it. It's hard to answer though, because I think um, being committed to something, like being a religious person, can be complicated. So some people, um, maybe they've never really been religious. It's just a social thing, or it's an image of some kind that they have of themselves. And then, of course, it's compatible with hatred because it's just skin deep, right? In fact, it's even useful for hatred because you can say, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And so we want. And then I think truly holy people, right? The way you recognize a holy person is lack of hatred. But so, so I think in that sense, I think you're absolutely right. Like, hatred is a sign that someone is not fully grown at the best, the best thing you could say. Sometimes but I think that there are people in the middle who they're struggling, and part of them knows the right way, but something unsettles them and gets them off track. And I mean, for me, it's hard. I think I feel the same way. Like I definitely, I don't understand the confidence that I'm seeing from people at this particular time, knowing what I know about the particular situations. I don't understand. I honestly don't understand how anyone has the confidence to hate, because what I see is something that's almost beyond comprehension. You know, and if I were in a different position, if I were a political leader, a general, a diplomat, if I had to then I might have to make choices, but I don't, as it happens. No one needs to, I don't need to weigh in on this thing. So I can say, my gosh, God, only you can untie this knot, because it's not, I can't see it. I can't see a way out. And that I think that it's good luck on my part, of grace, and I would say in my religion, that in this moment I'm doing that. But sometimes, I mean, hate is a human thing, and I think especially as a response to a wrongdoing, it's almost irresistible. There's a famous controversy in especially in Christianity. So there are the Psalms in the Bible, and they're part of the regular prayer of the Christian churches, especially the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And some of them are very vengeful. So there's one especially where someone says, "Oh God, if you would destroy my enemies, crash the heads of his children against the rocks." And they don't read it in churches because it doesn't sound Christian. But there it is. It's in the scriptures. What are you supposed to do with that? And I think you're not supposed to say, in a way I wish we read it in church, because you're not supposed to say, "Oh, how awful, yuck." Oh, you're supposed to say, "I am a human being and that belongs to me, and only God can heal it." So I suppose that's what I would like to feel about hatred. Not to be in the middle of it so that it's taken over me, so that I'm willing to commit violence or to harm others, but where I acknowledge that it belongs to me as a human being. I can hate. And the only reason I'm not hating is because of God's grace, God's providence. Otherwise, I would be hating, because that's what we do. We hurt each other and then we hate each other.
Thank you so much for that answer. Also, this is why I decided never not to do a solo episode yet, because this was like a good moment for me where I was like, I don't think I would be a very good person to talk about religion, because I feel like there will be points where I'll be like, this is right, do this. And then there will be points like where I'll not know anything. And this is why I'm so glad, and I've been so so keen on having you on because we need people like you to talk about these topics. And yes, I'm so glad that I'm not a journalist at this time, not a political leader at this time, because would not want to be in those positions.
No, it's, and all of the, what I find particularly horrifying and beyond all of the situations seem connected to one another.
Yeah.
So there's violence here, there's violence there. They're not unconnected. Like there's Ukraine, there's the Holy Land, and then, there's China, and then there's whatever is going on in India, and it's all over and then there's what's going on in the US. And there's probably much, much more connection. So how am I supposed to untangle
So
that?
true.
No way.
So true.
Absolutely not. Couldn't do it.
The funniest thing is, because now I'm reading my scriptures, which I didn't do growing up. Growing up, we just did the mantra chanting. Like my mother would teach me prayers, we would just do those. Now I'm reading all of my scriptures, and the funny thing is, when it was in the news that Hinduism is responsible for caste discrimination. And I was shocked. I'm like, what? Where did you get that? I'm reading, I didn't see that anywhere. Because the scriptures that I have read actively talk about the fact that nobody is different. Like an atheist is also very much a part of God, and a person of another religion, they're all parts of God. And Hinduism divides society based on your character. Like if you're someone who is into scriptures, you become a Brahmin. If you're someone who's happy to do the cleaning work, you become a Shudra. So that's based on your occupation and your character, on what you're choosing to do. Has nothing to do with birth. And I was so shocked. So this is the funny thing, and it will, I think, will help certain listeners who are afraid of encountering such ideas, like you pointed out, in religion, where you are hating and you are condemning your enemies and wanting them to be destroyed. It's the same scripture. If two people can read the same scripture and come away with something completely different. I read Bhagavad Gita and I realized that like this huge chunk of it was meet people where they're at. And if someone is completely against Bhagavad Gita itself, like they don't believe in Lord Krishna, they don't want to know about it. Don't read it to them. Don't invite them even to read it. It's there. If they want it someday, they can find it. You should not, like God would not be happy if you went and forced them, like, here, read it. And yet I find people holding Bhagavad Gita and stopping people on the road and asking them to read it. And I'm like, this is so funny, but this is, I think, something we should all keep in mind. It is a lot about your perception. So if all you see is hate, maybe question your perception and your judgment. Again, I'm fleshing this out.
No, I think that's right, because I think I might say something coming from a more secular background. One of the things that took me some time to realize was that, okay, there's a certain type, and I think there are real people like this. There are religious people who hate. They hate people who aren't of their religion. They say, maybe they hate all kinds of things, but they hate that the people that aren't in their group. But you know what? You go outside of religion, which is a bigger and bigger part of the world all the time, and you know what? Those people hate too. You don't need religion to hate. And that to me says it's not. You can use anything.
Anything. So
there's something in us that hurts and wants to exert some power over the world, and through hatred, and we'll use anything. We'll use absolutely anything. So I don't think it's necessarily connected to religion. That's one thing that I'm hearing in what you're saying. But the other thing I'm hearing is that a tradition, a real one, a old, deep tradition, a spiritual, religious tradition, it's a whole world. It isn't one or two like rules that you follow or ways of, there's a whole world in all kinds of roles that you can inhabit in it. And it develops over time. There are things which you see one way when you first start, and there's things they look differently later. It's like traveling in a different country, or like I say, a different world. So it's not, I think from the outside, it looks one dimensional. Here's what I am, I'm right and you're wrong. But when you're inside it, it doesn't look that way at all. And it's the same is true for restrictions, like ascetic restrictions. From the outside, it looks like, oh, wow, you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. From the inside, it doesn't feel that way. It really is. There's a reason why they call it conversion when you go, in our language, in the West, when you go from one religion to another or from non-religious to religious, because it's a transformation of what you see. And I can see why that's scary from the outside, but it's whatever it is, it's not superficial. It's not simple. It's not like joining a political party. It's not like choosing a favorite color of ice cream. It's rich and deep and just full of corners and spaces that you wouldn't have imagined.
I think this is something you just kind of have to take on board, which I found with my like the Hindu scriptures was you will encounter things that either don't make sense to you or make sense to you, and then you're like, no, why would you? That's not why is this here? Like, but again, it's you feel compelled to defend your religion, but at the same time, you kind of have to understand that some of it has been interpreted by humans, and then their personality is very much involved in it.
That's
and then
right.
you're a human with your own experience, and no matter how evolved you might believe yourself to be, you're very prone to even negative emotions. You may generally be a good person, but there is this degree of susceptibility that we all have.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I agree with that.
But thank you. I think you've really clarified things for me. Okay, do you think we can have an ascetic soul in a materialistic world? Do you think we can can we do that?
I mean, of course. But that's
I think you do. Based on what I've read, what I've heard in your videos about the intellectual pursuits, which in a way is very off the world, of the materialistic world. And from your book, I feel like you may have all of this love for materialistic thing, but I think you have an ascetic soul. I don't know.
It's that now when you put it that way, then I feel ashamed because I know all the ways that I am materialistic, even though I fight it.
But can the two principles coexist? Because I feel like asceticism is very much, like you've pointed out, it's very much about acceptance, about tolerance, it's not necessarily renunciation of comfort. Or am I wrong? I don't know. Again, I'm fleshing this out.
I think you're right. So I say that it's really about detachment, right? Asceticism. So and that's why you're right that maybe I'm not sure actually. I think I probably have some growth in this area that I need to do. That's why you can. What matters is what asceticism is about. It's about where your heart is, where your commitment is. So I can, I mean, this is the thing I think maybe it's not in the Religious Life book. It might be in the other one. There's something that St. John of the Cross, the great Christian mystic, says about King David, who was the author of the Psalms, the great king of Israel. And he says, King David, he's the person who's the speaker of the Psalms, but he's a king. So he says, I'm a poor man. What does he mean? He's the greatest king that's ever existed in Israel. Why does he say I'm poor and wretched? And what St. John says is that David is poor because he doesn't care about his kingship. He doesn't care about his wealth. He has it. He uses it. But if for God's sake he had to give it all up, he would do it. So the question about asceticism is about it's about wholeheartedness. It's about what you love, where your heart is. And that's why it is compatible with like I'm wearing a nice cashmere sweater and I have nice silver earrings, but I hope that if God said to me, now is time to wear a gunny sack and put a sack on your back and go off into the jungle, that I would say, okay, it's time to go. And that's really the thing, that's the goal, is to be ready, to be sort of on notice that none of these things, material things, matter. I think it's very much, in a way, I think it's easier. Okay, this might be wishful thinking, but this might be wishful thinking. In a way, it should be easier because the world that we're entering into, and maybe the US is a bit, quote unquote, ahead in India on this. Really, it's behind, but okay. It's such a superficial society. It's the consumerism is so pervasive and so shallow that you can't live the rest of your life in it. I mean, I know young people who they spend all of COVID watching Netflix and playing video games, and then they ran out they couldn't do it anymore. And so they became, parts of them opened up. So in a way, that's the hopeful, wishful thought, that in a way, the worse things get, the more commercial, the more material, the more consumerist they get, the harder it will be to believe that they really are going to be fulfilling, and the more that people will search for things that will endure, things that they can hang on to, things that will be there no matter what. I think that that's true.
Yeah, that's why I think what you are doing, I mean, I admire you so much for it, because I think a day of reckoning will come when everyone will need, and I think they will look to religion for support. And I want religion to be a point of, like, a super friendly place, a super open and accepting place, because it's not about my religion or your religion. It's about the wonderful parts of what I learned from certain scriptures and the other wonderful parts that I learned from another scripture. And then maybe perhaps following one religion in the sense that it gives you a structure, like you pointed out. It gives you this, say, guardrail, it gives you this place of faith and allows you to follow that through. And that is why do we have to pick one superior to the other? There is always going to be something very provocative, and not in a good way, about all of them. And you kind of have to use your own discernment.
Well, I think that in a way I of course I agree. This is the way I try to write also, right? I want things to be welcoming and open and comfortable and not judgmental. But the truth is that no matter what,
Mhm.
There's going to be an obstacle, because in a way there should be, because to follow God, whatever your faith, it's to give over your life. It's to lose control. I mean, really, you don't have control anyway, but it's to admit it. So it's going to be hard anyway. So there are people, I'm lucky, I'm successful and I'm charming and I talk to people well. So, but there are people who like me, who really, they don't get that I'm religious. It repels them. So they have this attraction and also kind of revulsion. It's like, how could you, do that?
Right.
And that's just the way it is. There's nothing I can do about that. It's not my responsibility to manage it for them. I'm doing the best I can. And in the end, you can't take responsibility for the obstacles that people have for themselves. It's not yours. Um, and it's the way things are. And more and that is part of the materialist consumer society, is that the obstacle is harder to get over, um, because it's so easy to do something different. It's so easy to float along with life and not really have to face the tough stuff.
I'm hoping to like reach a place where I have found so much peace and comfort in my religion, where I don't feel the need to ever, like, I'm happy have my life be an example of the wonders of it, the things religion can do for you. I want
Right.
someone to look at me and say, okay, religion did that for her, she looks like she's got it, so let me also follow this with maybe my own religion, maybe her religion, maybe whatever. And
Yeah.
not, and when somebody attacks me, be like, okay, I'm good, that's fine, you do you, I'm gonna do me. I
And
want that.
I'll
Yeah.
get there. We'll all get there someday.
Man, I really hope so. I want that. I do not ever want to be the reason someone goes home disturbed and feeling like they've just had a very unpleasant experience.
No, but you won't be able to avoid it. I'm sorry. I have to
I
say
know, that's the thing. That's the price of conviction. When you have conviction, you
Yeah.
can't help but be like, no, you are wrong, and
Yeah.
here's why. Oh man.
It's also a matter of discernment. Sometimes
Yeah.
then this is something also part of what I think is funny for me about religion too, is that it's corresponded with getting older. So isn't so much from faith so much as just being more of an adult. But you have to sometimes be very
Yeah.
unpleasant to people. And you
Yeah.
have to do it. And it's the right thing to do. So you can't get too attached to being comfortable either. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, this is exactly the conversation I had with that person that I told you about, that ascetic, that guru. He was
Yeah.
like, no, but you have to, when you see something wrong and you know your scripture can help, you have to share it. How can you not? You
Yeah.
have to believe in your scripture and your God enough to be able to say, no, look,
Yeah.
here's a better way. And I feel like, but then I always think like, okay, then what is the difference between me and the people I see on TV? And my
Yeah.
mother would always say, no, but you have a code by which you work. You would never hurt somebody just because they're not listening to you, or just because they're not doing things how you want them done.
Yeah. So sometimes you do it. My own view is sometimes you have to do it and sometimes you don't. And you have to judge it by circumstances. And it's true. What your mother says, I mean, that seems right, that it's one thing. The problem with religious hatred, it isn't that people are unpleasant or that they upset people. Something else has gone wrong, right? It's that they're acting selfishly. If it's hatred, they're hurting someone else for their own gain, their own ego, as you put it. And whereas being unpleasant when it's right, it's for someone else's good, not for yours. And it's not for your good. In fact, you might really hate doing it, but that it's the only way this other person is going to have, the other person needs it for some reason.
Yeah. Like when you talk about meditation, the eye roll is so hard on the other side, but you're like, no, but I'm still going to finish this thought because you're going to love it when you do it.
Exactly. And you don't always, the thing is that you don't always know from how someone reacts. It's just from my experience as a teacher, actually. Someone can react negatively, but in fact, it's taken root and they're thinking about it. And so something's going on, like they act like, oh, that's such a horrible, stupid, oh, but in fact, it's doing something else. In the long term, it's a positive effect, but you can't even always tell. In a way, that's why it's better not not to be too sensitive about what's going on with other people. Anyway, it's hard. Life is impossible.
Yes, sometimes it really is. Okay, I know I've reached the end of my time with you, but I just had one last
Please.
question. If you could, like, if right now God showed up, what question would you ask him or her?
What are you thinking?
I agree.
No, that was a joke. What would I really ask them? Oh, I don't know. I think I wouldn't ask them anything. I think I would just say, "Oh my gosh, there it is."
Yeah.
We want to be in the moment.
Yes.
It's
so
like
true.
if I could see my grandmother again, who died years ago. It's like, what would I ask her? I wouldn't ask her anything. I would just want to be there.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think that's what. Anyway, I hope that's a good answer.
That is a lovely answer.
So we've reached the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing your time with me. The episode description will have the links to all the resources mentioned during the episode. And if you prefer an audio experience, Experable Podcast is available on most podcast platforms. Now, if you enjoyed this conversation, I do hope you'll give the video a thumbs up and that you'll subscribe to the channel. And if the content of this conversation resonated with you, here's another conversation that you'll love. I hope you enjoy it. Now, I'll see you in the next video. Till then, take care of yourself. Bye.